the dynamics of what goes on in a hermeneutical circle, a pastoral cycle. Peter Stevenson did some work with master's level students and came up with this expanded model of theological reflection. So well, actually we kind of narrow it down to 4 steps, but there's a bunch of other stuff going on. So he said, well, if we start with description, clearly that's describing our own words, feelings, emotions, what the presenting situation is. Out of that comes a discussion in which different issues are then raised. Then we debate to get alternative points of view. Then we decide which issues we want to explore. Because actually you have a pastoral situation, you identify issues, and you've got 3 or 4 different things that kind of raise as potential issues to take further. And it may be that in one discussion it's not possible to cover all of the things that begin to work, so therefore there needs to be a debate that identifies which we will take forward. Dialogue is engaging with the scriptures and the grand tradition of the church. Develop is about developing new insights on the back of what's come out from the dialogue. Discipleship is actually how we translate these ideas into practice, because actually this stuff is all about discipleship. This is the bottom line definer of what we do here. And ending with devotion is recognizing that all of this takes place within our relationship with God, and it's about offering this development, this progress, this growing understanding to God as we then seek to live in the light of it. So the reality of our relationship with God is taken seriously. Now, I think this is incredibly helpful in terms of sketching the fuller canvas on which a theological reflection takes place. But it's almost too big to be manageable, because suddenly there become too many steps. And if you're to engage in a reflection in class, it actually then begins to get a bit tedious, or in a church meeting kind of context. And so a revised Spurgeon's model, not to say all these, because it was running with the same alliteration thing. The revised Spurgeon's model that Peter came up with has 5 steps: describe the experience, identify the issues, make the connections, develop new insights, consider the practical implications. This kind of all makes sense, hopefully, and is clearly straightforward. All of these are all kind of model on the same general thing, variations on a thing, if you like, coming out of that hermeneutical circle from liberation theology in its origins. One of the most exciting, there are loads of different models of theological reflection out there. That's where we began with that initial quotation. But one of the most exciting to emerge over recent years, in my experience, has come out of the Cambridge Theological Federation and the work of a Lady Methodist minister, Jane Leach. It still follows the circle motif, but she talks about this as a model of pastoral theology as a tension. And what she's wanting to say is, at different points of the reflection, we need to be paying attention to different things, to different voices. So the starting point for Leach is attention to the voices. What she means with this, whose voices are a part of this conversation? What are they saying? What feelings are being expressed? Whose voices are absent? Whose voices are being silenced? Whose voices are being mediated by somebody else? And how does it nuance them? So as we sit down to do a theological reflection, it's actually about attending to the voices. Now, one of the things that becomes obvious from Leach is that we are standing one step removed and observing. And once we've completed this first step of attention to the voices, we then have to look to attention to the wider issues. You know, what is raised by this conversation? So, what are the trends in culture that are exemplified here, she says? What kinds of human behaviour are exhibited here? How has the past shaped the present? And what do other academic disciplines have to say? What light can they shed? Sociology or psychology or history? And what witnesses are there from this context that we can draw on? The experience of doctors or local politicians or children who might help us understand things better. So attention to the wider issues. By the way, I will post onto the online resources a fuller document with some of these deeper descriptions of the models for your reference, just to let you know that that will become to augment the slides. The third step is, I think, quite key. It's about emotional intelligence. It's about understanding how I impact the conversation, the discussion, the situation. So what is my role in this? You know, how do I feel about it? You know, if you're the pastor and something's going down, how am I feeling as a pastor in this? And how is that affecting my judgment? How is that affecting how I'm responding to people? Where do I locate myself in relation to the issues that are emerging? And what are my instincts about this issue? And what's informing those instincts? You know, what are the drivers behind my own position? You know, my own experience, my reading of scripture, what I've been taught by others, what I've read. What's informing that? So understanding that actually when we do a theological reflection, it's not kind of hermeneutically sealed, and we are, you know, the objective founder of all truth, understanding and interpretation, that we're actually involved in the midst of this and are therefore having an impact on it, and we need to recognise and see that. Yes, Sandra?
This is much less clinical.
Oh yeah.
This is just much more personal.
Yes.
And the other ones you can see, it's like very sort of sterile in a way.
Sterile is a strong word. No,
my nursing background.
Okay, I hear that within the... See how background influences the language we use. Yeah, I think the other models are more formal and can be more academic. This is far more interpersonal and relational. Somebody commented this is actually a more female way of addressing theological reflection, where the others are more male and cerebral. And as far as we believe that kind of gender stereotyping, I think there is some measure of insight and truth in that. But moving on to something far, The fourth step then is where theology comes in, attention to the theological tradition. You know, what ethics are practiced in this situation? Why? What's the theology or ideology that sits behind them? What biblical texts resonate or set up a challenge to this kind of encounter or situation? And why these texts and not those texts? Yet, what is the tradition of our church? A Baptist church, a Methodist church, a Pentecostal church? You know, what is the momentum that being within this part of the Christian family brings into this